The lobby doors exploded inward before the first gunshot even registered. Three men in black moved through the revolving glass like they owned the air itself, weapons raised, faces blank, hunting someone specific in a room full of expensive luggage and frightened hotel staff. One of them grabbed the concierge by the collar and pressed a gun barrel against the man's temple without a word, without a flicker of hesitation, the way you'd press a button in an elevator. Just casual, just business. The concierge's coffee cup hit the marble floor and nobody moved to clean it up. Outside, Toronto was locked under a storm that had been building for 3 days. Ice on every surface. Wine that found the gaps in every coat. The kind of night that pushed people indoors and made the whole city feel smaller than it actually was. Inside the Meridian Grand, someone was about to get very seriously hurt, and Kaya Mercer had just walked through the wrong door at exactly the wrong moment. If you've been following this channel, you know we don't do slow burns here. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, because what happens next in this story is something you do not want to walk into cold. She had come in only to get out of the weather. That was the whole of it. No reservation, no meeting, no reason beyond the fact that her scrubs were soaked through to her skin after 3 blocks in horizontal sleet, and the Meridian Grand had a revolving door that opened directly onto King Street. She pushed through it the way she pushed through everything lately. Head down, no eye contact, minimum footprint. Habit from another life she had worked very hard to bury. The warmth hit her first, then the smell. That particular blend of marble floor wax, cut flowers, and someone's very expensive cologne that luxury hotels maintained like a religion. Kaya stopped just inside the entrance, pulled her wet ponytail off her neck, and took a breath. She had 40 minutes before her next shift started. She would sit in the lobby, dry out, and leave without speaking to anyone. Simple. She made it approximately 9 steps before a man appeared around the corner of the guest services desk, moving too fast for the space, shoulder catching hers hard enough to spin her half around. Her coffee thermos hit the floor and rolled 3 feet. Her bag swung off her shoulder and dumped across the marble. Hospital ID badge, protein bar wrappers, a paperback she hadn't opened in 6 days, and a set of trauma shears that clattered loudly enough that the nearest bellhop turned to look. The man who had hit her stopped. She looked up. I was younger than she expected for someone who carried himself like that. Early 30s at the outside, jaw sharp enough to look like a design choice, wearing a charcoal suit that hadn't been purchased anywhere near a mall. Dark eyes that did the same thing her eyes did in a crowded room, the thing she'd spent years trying to train herself out of. They moved, constantly, cataloging exits, threats, sightlines. She recognized the behavior the way you recognize a mirror. I apologize, he said. His voice was even, unhurried, the kind of voice that had practiced being calm under conditions she probably didn't want to imagine. It's fine. Kaya crouched and started gathering her things. He crouched at the same moment, picked up her trauma shears, and held them out with the same careful grip she would have used. Blades away, handle first. She noticed that. She didn't mean to notice it, but she did. Nurse, he said, looking at her badge for exactly 1 second before looking back at her face. ER. She took the shears, stood. You should watch where you're... That was when the lobby doors came apart. Not gently. Not with any kind of announcement. The glass panels of the revolving door simply stopped cooperating as 230 pounds of man in a tactical vest hit them at speed, and then there were 3 of them inside the Meridian Grand, and the overhead lights felt suddenly inadequate, and the concierge's coffee was still spreading across the floor, and nobody in the lobby had finished processing what was happening. Kaya's body processed it before her mind did. She was already moving left, putting the nearest structural column between herself and the 3 men, before she'd consciously identified them as armed. Her hand came up and caught the arm of a woman near the guest services desk. A guest, mid-60s, frozen in place with her mouth open, and pulled her sideways without explanation. The woman stumbled. Kaya held her upright and kept moving, keeping the column between them and the open lobby floor. She didn't understand why she'd done any of that until she was behind the column and the first man was pressing his weapon against the concierge's skull. And then she understood it very well, and her understanding felt like cold water poured down the inside of her chest. She pressed her back against the marble and made herself breathe. 4 seconds. She used 4 seconds to map what she'd seen before she moved. 3 men, weapons visible, entering from the King Street side. No police yet. The storm would have swallowed the sound of any approach. Hotel security was the young man near the elevator bank, currently standing very still with his hands at his sides, which meant he had either been trained to wait or he was scared. Probably both. Guests scattered across the lobby, maybe 14, 15 people, most of them bunching toward the far wall near the restaurant entrance, which was exactly the wrong instinct because it made them a cluster rather than individuals, and clusters were easier to manage by force. She did not know why she knew that. She knew that she knew it, and she knew she wasn't supposed to anymore, and she filed that fact away for later examination at a time when nobody was holding a gun to a concierge's head. A hand closed around her wrist. She had her elbow up and her weight shifted in the half-second before she registered it was the man from the coffee incident, now crouched beside her against the column, his suit jacket gone somehow. She hadn't seen him remove it, his expression absolutely level. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're about to do." His eyes moved to the lobby floor and back to her. "They're not here for the guests." She studied him for 2 seconds. "Who are they here for?" A pause. Brief enough that she nearly missed it. "Me," he said. His name, she would learn later, was Lucian Vale, though that name wouldn't mean anything to her for another 12 hours. Right now, he was just a man in a good suit who had nearly knocked her flat, who moved like someone who had spent real time in dangerous rooms, and who had apparently brought 3 armed men into the lobby of a hotel where she was just trying to dry off. She would be furious about this later. Right now, there wasn't room for it. "How many exits does this building have?" she asked. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're asking me about exits. You said they're here for you. That means they came in the main entrance because they expected you to leave through it, which means they either don't know about the service corridors or they've got those covered too, so I need to know which it is." Lucian Vale stared at her for a long moment. Not the stare of someone sizing up a threat. Something else. Something she couldn't categorize, and she was usually good at categorizing people. "Service exit through the kitchen," he said. "Loading dock on Adelaide. And a parking structure connection on the east side, level -1, staff access only." "Do they have people on those?" "I sent 2 ahead. The kitchen exit." His jaw tightened. "I haven't heard from either of them in 4 minutes." "Then the kitchen exit is compromised." She was already thinking through the geometry of the building. Loading dock? Possible. Parking structure? Unknown. In the lobby, one of the armed men was speaking into a radio, low and fast. The concierge was on his knees now, hands locked behind his head. 2 hotel guests near the fountain had started crying, quietly, the way people cried when they were trying to make themselves invisible. The bellhop was inching toward the service hallway. "The bellhop is going to get himself shot," Kaya said. Lucien looked. His expression didn't change, but something in it shifted. The tiniest recalibration. "He'll stop if someone tells him to." "Then tell him." "I can't signal him without—" "I can." She didn't wait for his response. She was already moving, staying low, using the check-in desk as cover, cutting across to the bellhop's sightline. She caught his eye the moment he looked her way and gave him one slow, deliberate shake of her head. The kind of gesture that didn't require context. He stopped moving. His back went against the wall. "Good." She moved back to Lucian. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question, and she didn't answer it. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they start checking the perimeter. We need to move." "My people, I know." She looked him straight in the face. "You want to help your people? You need to be alive. Move." He looked at her for one more second with that unreadable expression, and then he nodded once, sharply, and they moved. The parking structure was the right call. She knew it was the right call approximately 30 seconds after they made it, when they heard the first gunshot from the direction of the kitchen corridor. Muffled, distant, but unmistakable. And then 2 more. Whoever Lucian Vale was, whoever these men were, it was the kind of conflict that didn't leave witnesses standing around to give statements. She didn't let herself think about the 2 men he'd sent ahead. She put it in a box and sealed it and kept moving. They found the staff access stairwell. 4 floors of concrete and emergency lighting and the sound of the storm somewhere above them, and Kaya's wet shoes squeaking on every other step. She counted floors without thinking about it, counted steps. Her mind doing what it always did in situations like this, the thing it shouldn't be doing anymore, the thing she had tried for 3 years to convince herself she had outgrown. Level -1 opened into a parking structure that smelled of exhaust and damp concrete, the kind of underground space that absorbed all external sound and gave you back nothing but fluorescent hum. 3 rows of vehicles, low clearance, 2 exits that she could see, a vehicle ramp on the far end, and a pedestrian door near the elevator bank. Lucian's phone was already out. He typed fast, his back against the support pillar, watching the ramp exit while she watched the pedestrian door. "You're calling for extraction?" she said. He didn't look up. "Something like that." "How long?" 8 minutes, possibly 12. "Those men upstairs won't take 12 minutes to figure out you're not in the lobby." "No," he agreed. "They won't." She looked at him sideways. He had a cut above his right ear that he hadn't mentioned. She'd noticed it in the stairwell lighting, a thin dark line that was still bleeding slowly. Head wounds were like that. They bled convincingly for injuries that were often superficial, but not always. "How did you get that?" she asked. He touched the spot automatically, looked at his fingers. "Lobby. When they came through the door. Flying glass." He put his phone away. "It's nothing." "I know it's nothing. I'm a nurse. I can see it's nothing." She reached into her bag, found a packet of gauze that she kept as automatically as most people kept lip balm, and held it out. Pressed that against it anyway. He took the gauze without argument. That surprised her slightly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kaya." "Lucian." He pressed the gauze against the cut. "Kaya what?" "Just Kaya right now." She checked the pedestrian door again, still clear. "We can do last names if we make it through the next 10 minutes. A sound from the ramp, distant, vehicular, growing. Her whole body tensed before she recognized it as the particular sound of a large SUV moving fast underground, headlights sweeping across the far wall. Lucien relaxed a fraction. "That's mine," he said. She watched the vehicle pull up and stop. Dark, expensive, windows that told her nothing about the interior. A man got out of the passenger side, heavy-shouldered, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who had spent real time doing something that required careful efficiency, and said, "Sir," in the quiet way people said it when the word meant several things at once. Lucian moved toward the vehicle and then stopped, turned back. She was still standing beside the support pillar, bag on her shoulder, gauze in her hand. He said, "I can have someone take you wherever you need to go. I have a shift in 30 minutes. The absurdity of that sentence in this particular moment was not lost on her. "Then we'll get you there." He paused. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the lobby when she'd identified the kitchen exit as compromised. That same quality of attention, the kind that felt less like interest and more like the final phase of a calculation. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm just—" She stopped herself. "What?" "Trained." She said the word before she could stop it, and then couldn't take it back. "I'm trained to appear calm." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Trained by who?" he said softly. She didn't answer. The man by the SUV said, "Sir, we need to move," and the moment cracked open and scattered. Lucien held her gaze for one more beat, a beat long enough to feel intentional, and said 2 words. "Found you." Not loud, not threatening. Almost gentle, the way you'd say it to someone you'd spent a long time looking for without quite admitting it to yourself. Then he got in the vehicle. Kaya stood in the concrete cold of the parking structure and listened to the sound of the engine fade up the ramp, and the storm came back in through the gaps in the ceiling panels. And she stood there for what was probably 20 seconds and felt the familiar closing sensation of something she didn't want to feel. The recognition that no matter how well you bury a past, the past has very specific opinions about staying buried. She had been Kaya Mercer, ER nurse, for 3 years. Before that, she had been someone else entirely, in places she didn't talk about, doing things she had decided at 29 that she was done doing. She had changed her name. She had changed her city. She had chosen the most controlled form of her old skills: emergency medicine, triage, the ability to make the right decision under pressure. And she had built a life around it that looked, from the outside, like a perfectly reasonable life. 2 words from a stranger in a parking garage, and the whole structure of that argument felt suddenly and irritatingly fragile. She put the gauze back in her bag. She walked to the pedestrian exit. She had 27 minutes to get across the city in a sleet storm to a trauma bay that needed her, and she was going to focus on that and nothing else. And she was absolutely not going to think about the way Lucian Vale had looked at her when she'd mapped his exits for him without being asked. The door swung open onto an alley. The storm came at her immediately, hard and sideways, ice against the exposed skin of her face and hands. She walked into it. Somewhere behind her, on the upper floors of the Meridian Grand, 2 men were probably not going home tonight. A concierge was going to need counseling. A bellhop was going to tell the story of this night at every dinner party for the next decade. And Kaya Mercer, whose real name she hadn't used in 3 years, walked through the ice and the dark toward her hospital, and told herself she would never see Lucian Vale again. She was wrong about that. She would see him in 61 hours. He would be standing in her trauma bay, watching her work, and there would be blood on his shirt. Not his, and his face would be the same controlled surface it had been in the lobby and the parking structure, and underneath that surface she would read, for the first time, something that looked less like composure and more like grief. But that was 61 hours from now. Right now, she had a shift to get to and a street to cross, and weather that had absolutely no interest in her personal circumstances. She pulled her collar up and kept walking. The trauma bay at St. Aurelius General did not care what kind of night you'd had. It didn't care that your scrubs were still damp at the collar from a sleet storm you'd walked through 40 minutes ago. It didn't care that your hands had a slight tremor you were working to control, the kind that came not from fear but from the aftermath of fear, the body's invoice delivered late. It didn't care that somewhere across the city, in a parking structure that smelled of exhaust and cold concrete, a man had looked at you like he already knew your name before you'd given it. The trauma bay at St. Aurelius had a GSW in Bay 3, a construction worker with a rebar puncture in Bay 5, and a 16-year-old who had put her fist through a window and was now sitting on a gurney with glass in her knuckle tendons and the specific expression of someone who deeply regretted their choices but was not yet ready to admit it. Kaya went to work. She moved through the bay the way she always moved. Economy of motion, no wasted steps, the kind of efficiency that looked, to people who didn't know what they were looking at, like calm. Her colleague Petra, a Haitian-Canadian nurse with 11 years on her and a talent for reading a room, glanced up from the GSW and clocked Kaya's expression with the precision of someone who had been reading Kaya's expressions for 2.5 years. "You're late," Petra said. 4 minutes. "You're never late." "Tonight I was 4 minutes late," Kaya snapped on gloves. "What's the GSW?" Petra gave her a look that said this conversation was not over and then gave her the medical facts because she was a professional. The GSW was a 22-year-old male, entry wound left lateral abdomen, no exit, pressure holding, BP dropping. Surgeon had been paged. Kaya moved in, assessed the packing, assessed the man's color, spoke to him in the quiet voice she used when someone was frightened, which he was, despite the bravado in his jaw. She worked for 4 hours without stopping. At 2 in the morning, the bay went quiet enough that Petra brought her coffee and sat across from her at the nurse's station and said, "You going to tell me what happened?" "Nothing happened." "You've got a bruise starting on your left shoulder and your ID badge is on backward." Kaya looked down. The badge was in fact on backward. She'd clipped it in the parking structure without looking. "I walked into someone," she said, "in a hotel lobby." "What kind of someone?" She thought about Lucian Vale's hands picking up her trauma shears, blades away, handle first. She thought about 3 armed men moving through a revolving door. She thought about 2 words spoken in a parking garage, quiet and certain, the way you'd say something you'd been holding for a long time. "The inconvenient kind," she said. Petra stared at her. Petra had a gift for staring that communicated volumes without requiring any actual words. Then she drank her coffee and said, "Okay," in the tone that meant the opposite of okay, and went back to her paperwork. Kaya drove home at 3:15 in weather that had not improved. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Ossington that she had chosen because the landlord didn't ask many questions, and the street was noisy enough that ambient sound was a constant. Noise meant you weren't listening to the inside of your own head as much. She had learned that about herself at 26, in a country she didn't talk about anymore, and it remained true. She put her keys on the hook. She showered. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror and looked at herself for a moment. The bruise Petra had noticed was developing properly now, purple-yellow, along the shoulder where Lucian Vale had hit her in the lobby. Collision, accident, the most ordinary possible contact between 2 strangers in a city of millions. Found you. She turned off the light and went to bed and lay in the dark and did not sleep for a long time. But 61 hours after the Meridian Grand, her pager went off at 11:47 in the morning. Trauma activation. Multiple casualties inbound. ETA 6 minutes. She was already in the bay when the paramedics came through with the first gurney, and she almost didn't see him. He was standing against the far wall, past the triage desk, jacket gone, the cut above his ear cleaned and butterfly taped, his eyes moving across the trauma bay the same way they'd moved across the hotel lobby. mapping, calculating. She had approximately 1 second to register his presence before the gurney was in front of her and the paramedic was talking fast. Male, approximately 40, single, GSW, right upper chest, entry subclavian region, exit unclear, BP 80 over palp, GCS 14, 1 large bore IV, 2 liters in. She was already moving. Her hands went to the man's neck, his pulse, the wound site. The man on the gurney was large, heavy muscle across the chest and shoulders, the kind of build that came from specific physical labor, or from the specific physical requirements of a specific kind of work. His face was gray-white under his natural complexion. He was awake, which was something, but his breathing had a quality she didn't like. "What's his name?" she said to the room. "Marcus." Lucian Vale's voice from the wall, controlled, too controlled, the kind of control that was actively holding something else down. "His name is Marcus." She didn't look up. "Marcus." She put her hand on his jaw, made him focus on her. "I'm Kaya. I'm going to take care of you. I need you to stay with me." His eyes found hers. Something in them relaxed a fraction. Not much, but enough. The fear didn't leave, but it moved over and made room for something else. "Kaya," Marcus said. His voice was like gravel run through a filter. "Yeah, right here." She was already reading the wound. Entry right subclavian, lateral enough to miss the great vessels, but the breathing quality. She reached for her stethoscope. "Did you lose consciousness at any point?" "No." Pain scale, 1 to 10. 6. A pause. 7. Decreased breath sounds on the right. She looked at the paramedic. "What's his SAT?" 91 on 2 liters. Tension pneumothorax was a possibility she needed to rule out fast. She called for a chest tray, moved through the assessment in the rapid sequence she'd run hundreds of times, felt the particular focus that came in these moments, the closing off of everything peripheral, the reduction of the whole world to the body in front of her and the information it was giving her, the narrowing of her mind to a point. Behind her, against the wall, Lucian Vale was silent. She felt him watching. The way you felt a draft from an open window. Not threatening, just present, impossible to ignore once you'd noticed it. She shut it out. She worked. 15 minutes later, Marcus was stable, the chest tray had been deployed, the surgeon was en route for what would likely be an exploratory procedure, and Kaya stepped back from the gurney with blood on her gloves and the particular emptying sensation that followed a successful triage. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the releasing of a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Lucien was at her shoulder. She hadn't heard him cross the bay. She turned and found him 2 feet away, closer than she expected, and something in her posture changed. Not retreat exactly. Readiness. Old reflex. "He'll make it," she said. "I know." He looked at Marcus through the trauma bay window. "I watched you work. You were in my bay without clearance. Your security is not very motivated." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She pulled off her gloves, dropped them. "What happened to him?" "Someone who wants something from me shot someone I consider family to make a point." She looked at him. His face was the same surface it had been in the parking structure. Managed, deliberate, every line in the right place. But she'd seen enough people trying to hold themselves together under pressure that she could read the seams. He was tired. Not physically. The other kind. "Come with me," she said. He followed her to the family consultation room. A small, aggressively beige space with chairs that were too soft and a box of tissues on the table that nobody ever used because crying felt too exposed in a room this small. She shut the door. "Sit down," she said. "I don't need to—" "Sit down, Lucien." He sat. He sat the way large animals sat when they weren't sure they wanted to be sitting, with all the weight forward, not settled, ready to be upright again in a second. She sat across from him and looked at him without the professional filter she'd used in the bay. And what she saw underneath the controlled surface was something that looked like a man who had been holding an enormous amount of weight for an enormous amount of time. "Who did this?" she said. "A man named Damien Crow." "Who is Damien Crow?" "Someone who decided about 8 months ago that my organization's territory in the East End was something he wanted." He said it flatly. No drama. "He's been escalating. What happened tonight is the first time he's moved directly against someone close to me." "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at her with that particular quality of attention. Because you asked. I asked because Marcus is my patient, and I need to understand the threat environment he's in. She kept her voice level. Not because I have any interest in being part of whatever this is. You were already part of it the moment you walked into the Meridian Grand. That was an accident. Yes, he said. It was. He didn't look away from her. That doesn't change what I saw. She felt her jaw tighten. What did you see? Someone who moved like she'd been in a room full of weapons before. Someone who identified the exit strategy in under 30 seconds. Someone who... He stopped, let out a breath. Someone who knew to keep her footprint small the moment she understood the situation. That's not training you get in a nursing program. The room felt smaller than it had been. She was very aware of the distance between them and the door. You don't know anything about me, she said. No. He folded his hands on the table, a deliberate gesture, something to do with them. But I'd like to. I'm not interested in being recruited. I'm not recruiting you. Then what are you doing? He was quiet for a moment. The silence had the quality of something he'd been carrying for a while, something heavy enough that even setting it down briefly was effortful. Marcus was with me for 11 years, he said. Before him, I had a lieutenant named Cassidy who was shot in a parking structure 3 years ago and bled out before anyone could stop it. Before her... He stopped. His jaw worked once. Before her, I had a sister, younger, 23. There was an incident. She was hurt. Nobody around her knew how to do anything except call for help and wait, and the wait was too long. Kaya didn't move. I have been surrounded, he said, for the entirety of my adult life, by people who know how to cause injury and nobody who knows how to stop it. And every time someone I care about ends up on the wrong end of that equation, it is because nobody in my circle can do what you just did in that bay. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm telling you what I've been looking for. And I'm telling you that I think you already know exactly what I'm talking about. She knew exactly what he was talking about. That was the problem. Get out of my consultation room, she said. He stood. No argument, no pressure. He straightened his jacket, the jacket she hadn't noticed he'd gotten back somehow, and moved toward the door. My sister's name was Elise, he said, without turning around. She was funny. She argued about everything. A pause. She would have liked watching you work. He opened the door and left. Kaya sat in the beige room with the untouched tissue box and the weight of that name in the air, Elise, and the thing she didn't want to feel, which was recognition. The specific, unwanted recognition of someone who had built their entire current life around atonement for something they couldn't undo and didn't talk about. She stayed in that room for 6 more minutes than she should have. The name Damien Crowe appeared in her awareness for the first time the following morning, as a photograph on a news website she'd opened looking for something else entirely. Crime figure questioned in connection with East End shooting. The photograph showed a man in his 50s, broad across the face, the kind of person who looked comfortable in expensive clothing without looking like the clothing had changed him. He was smiling for the camera in the way people smiled when they understood that the camera captured what you wanted it to capture and nothing else. She closed the tab. She made coffee. She ate half a piece of toast. She sat at her kitchen table and told herself that what she knew about Lucian Vale's world was exactly the amount she needed to know, which was just enough to understand why Marcus had a bullet in his chest and not one word more. Her phone rang at 9:47. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Ms. Mercer. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, flat. The kind of flat that wasn't natural. My employer would like to meet with you. Your employer can call my hospital. That's not the kind of meeting he has in mind. She felt something cold at the back of her neck. Not the storm. Not the weather. Something interior. Who is your employer? She said. Someone who finds it interesting, the voice said, that Lucian Vale spent 45 minutes in a public hospital consulting a nurse with no traceable history before the age of 29. A pause. Very interesting. The line went dead. She set the phone down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at the half-eaten piece of toast and the coffee going cold at the edge of the counter. No traceable history before the age of 29. Whoever had made that call had run her background and found the seam she'd spent 3 years hoping nobody would find. Not impossible. The right resources, the right motivation. But not something a random person did. not something that happened without a reason. She picked up her phone again and scrolled to the number she'd saved 2 nights ago, in the parking structure, from the screen of Lucian Vale's phone when he hadn't been looking. Old habit. She'd saved it without thinking and hadn't acknowledged to herself that she'd done it until this moment. She called it. He picked up on the second ring. Kaya. Someone just called me, she said. They knew my name. They knew you'd been at St. Aurelius. They ran my background. Silence. The quality of the silence told her he was processing quickly. What did they say? That their employer wants a meeting. Did they identify their employer? No, but they mentioned your name and they mentioned my background in the same sentence, which means whoever made that call is trying to understand what I am to you. And what are you to me? She stood up from the table. She moved to her window. Outside, Ossington Avenue was wet from overnight rain, the city grinding through its morning with complete indifference to the fact that her life was apparently being surveilled. Nothing, she said. I am nothing to you. We have met twice. That's all this is. Kaya, yeah. Don't. You know who Damien Crowe is? I looked him up this morning. Then you understand that a call like the one you just received is not exploratory. That's not Damien Crowe gathering information. His voice was still level, but there was an edge underneath it now. That's Damien Crowe telling you he already has the information and wants you to know it. She stared at the street below. A woman was walking a dog in the rain, the dog completely unbothered by the weather, tail going, normal city, normal morning. What does he want with me? She said. He wants leverage. A pause. He's decided you're leverage. I don't know how he reached that conclusion in 48 hours, but he's faster than I gave him credit for. This is not my problem to solve. I know that. I didn't ask for any of this. I know that too. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. The kind of second where you were allowed to be tired before you had to stop being tired. What do I do? She said, not meaning to say it, saying it anyway. Let me send someone to you. No. Kaya, I said no. I'm not going to have one of your people standing outside my apartment building. She pulled her forehead off the glass, straightened. I'll come to you. The silence this time had a different quality. All right, he said. Text me an address. She picked up her jacket off the hook by the door. And Lucien? Yes. If I find out this call was manufactured, if I find out you arranged this to get me to walk through your door, I didn't, he said. She believed him. She wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. Address, she said, and hung up. The address was a commercial building in the West End, the kind that looked unremarkable from the outside and was aggressively unmemorable on purpose. 4 stories, smoked glass on the lower 2 levels, the upper floors presenting nothing to the street. She'd walked past buildings like this in other cities, in another life, and known exactly what they were for. A man named Rook met her at the door. He was shorter than she expected for someone with that much presence, compact, dark-skinned, with the kind of stillness in his face that came from having been in situations where movement was the wrong choice. He looked at her like he was reading a document he'd already memorized and was just confirming the details. Ms. Mercer, he said, Kaya's fine. Kaya. He held the door. He said you'd come alone. I am alone. He also said you'd look like you were mad about it. She walked past him without answering, which felt like the appropriate response. The interior was not what she'd constructed in her imagination. No visible weapons, no gathered men with nothing useful to do. A large open space on the second floor that looked more like a converted loft. Exposed structural, a conference table that had been cleared, and at the far end, Lucian Vale standing at a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking an interior courtyard, his back to the room. He turned when she came in. He looked worse than he had at the hospital. Not dramatically. He was still wearing the controlled surface like armor, but she'd had enough exposure to him now to read what was under it, and what was under it was a man who hadn't slept. How's Marcus? He said. Out of surgery, vitals stable. He'll be off his feet for 6 weeks minimum, and he needs to follow up with a thoracic specialist, which I'm guessing is your problem to arrange. I'll arrange it. Good. She set her bag down on the conference table. She looked at him. Talk to me about Damien Crowe. He did. He talked for 20 minutes, and she let him talk without interrupting, because the information was real, and she needed all of it, and he was giving it to her without editorializing. Damien Crowe had been a mid-level presence in Toronto's organized landscape for 15 years. Patient, methodical, the kind of person who built slowly and didn't overextend. 8 months ago, something had changed. He'd begun moving against established territories with a speed and aggression that didn't match his historical pattern. 3 people in Lucian's outer circle had been approached with offers. One of them had accepted. The shooting of Marcus was retaliation for an intercepted shipment, but also, and this was the part that put the cold thing back in Kaya's neck, a demonstration. Of what? She said. That he can reach anyone I care about. Lucian held her gaze. And now he's decided that list includes you. I'm not on your list. He doesn't know that. Then correct his information. I can't correct his information without giving him access to information. Lucian sat down at the conference table, the first time she'd seen him sit without being told to. He looked for a moment like a person rather than a position. Any signal I send about you, he reads. Right now the most useful thing is that he doesn't know what you are. What I am, she repeated. To me. What you are to me. He met her eyes. Which I acknowledge is something we haven't defined. The word defined landed in the room and stayed there. Kaya pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, folded her hands on the table the same way he had in the consultation room, and she wasn't sure if she was mirroring him deliberately or if it was reflex. I need you to understand something, she said. All right. I left a specific kind of life 3 years ago. I left it because I was done. Not because I burned out. I made a decision with everything I had that I was going to be someone else. I built that from the ground up. My apartment, my hospital, my colleagues, the particular coffee shop on Ossington where the guy behind the counter knows my order. She kept her voice even. That life is the most important thing I've built, and I will not sacrifice it. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't qualify, didn't look away. I'm telling you this, she said, because I think you're about to ask me for something, and I want you to understand the context in which I'm hearing it. I'm not going to ask you for anything, he said. She waited. I'm going to tell you the truth, he said, and let you make your own decision. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. Damien Crowe now knows your name. He knows your workplace. He knows you have a background that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Those facts exist regardless of what I ask or don't ask. That's not leverage I created. That's a situation. And your proposed solution? Not a solution. He was precise about the word. A reality. My people can protect you, not because you can't protect yourself. I've seen enough to know that question is more complicated than it looks. But because Crowe has resources, and he has already moved once in 48 hours. And the thing about someone who moves that fast is that the second move comes before you're ready for it. The room was quiet. Somewhere below them, the building made the sounds buildings made. The deep structural murmur of HVAC, a door somewhere, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone relevant. And in exchange, she said, there's no exchange. Lucien. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not much, but enough. I would like you to be safe, he said. That's all. I would like you to be safe, and I would like Marcus to recover, and I would like to find a way through the next several weeks that doesn't result in more people I give a damn about ending up in a trauma bay. It wasn't a speech. It was just a sentence, delivered without architecture, with the particular flatness of something true. She sat with it for a moment. I have a shift at 6, she said. I know. I'm going to go to my shift. I know that too. And when I come home at 2 in the morning, she stopped. She hadn't decided this. She was deciding it right now, in real time, which was not how she preferred to operate. When I come home at 2 in the morning, if there is someone outside my building, they will be discreet. I will not acknowledge them. I will not interact with them. And this, she gestured at the room, the building, the whole of what it represented, does not enter my hospital, not my bay, not my colleagues, not anything I have built there. Agreed, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. She stood, picked up her bag, moved toward the door. Kaya. She stopped but didn't turn around. The man who called you this morning, Lucian said. His name is Pavel. He works point for Crowe's East End operation. The fact that he called you directly, rather than sending someone to your door, means Crowe doesn't know yet how much you matter. He's still deciding. A pause. He'll decide soon. She turned that over, filed it. Then we have a limited window, she said. Yes. She turned around and looked at him across the length of the conference table. He looked back. The morning light through the smoked glass gave the room a color that was almost blue, and in that light his face was very tired and very still. Don't waste it, she said. She walked out. Rook was at the bottom of the stairs, and he said nothing, and she said nothing, and she walked through the unremarkable door into the wet West End street, and the city swallowed her up the way it swallowed everyone, complete and indifferent. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Not the same one as the morning call, a different one. We know you went to see him. Tell him we said hello. She stopped on the sidewalk. People moved around her the way water moved around a stone, nobody making eye contact, nobody slowing down. She read the text twice and then put her phone in her pocket and stood for a moment in the gray Toronto morning and felt the exact sensation she'd been trying to avoid since the moment she'd walked into the Meridian Grand. The sensation of a door closing behind her. She had left one life because she was done with it. The second life she'd built was still intact, technically. Her apartment, her hospital, the coffee shop on Ossington, the guy behind the counter who knew her order. But the wall between that life and this one had just developed a fracture, and fractures under pressure did only one thing. She started walking. She had 5 hours before her shift started, and a specific kind of clarity that came from situations that didn't leave you the option of confusion. The man named Pavel was going to call again, or he was going to send someone instead of calling. Either way, the next contact would come faster than the first, because that was how this kind of pressure worked. You gave someone time to absorb the first move, and then you hit them with the second before they'd finished absorbing. She wasn't going to give him time. She walked faster. Behind her, on the street she'd left, a silver sedan that had been parked at the corner pulled slowly into traffic and followed at a distance of 2.5 car lengths, close enough to keep visual contact, far enough to suggest professional patience. She didn't look back. She already knew it was there. She didn't go home. That was the first decision, made in the middle of the sidewalk with a silver sedan 2.5 car lengths behind her and 5 hours before her shift started. Going home meant giving Pavel, or whoever was in that car, a confirmed residential address they may or may not have already had. Giving them confirmed information felt worse than the uncertainty. Uncertainty was at least something she could work with. She turned left at the next corner, walked half a block, and went into a coffee shop she'd never been in before. Ordered something she didn't want. Sat at a table near the back with a sight line to the entrance and the emergency exit both, and took out her phone. The silver sedan did not follow her in. That told her something. Not professionals. Or rather, professionals who'd been given a watching brief. Not a taking brief. Crow wanted her to know she was being watched. That was the point. The call from Pavel, the text after she left Lucian's building, now the sedan. It was a sequence, and the sequence was designed to produce a specific feeling. She knew what the feeling was supposed to be. She'd seen it used before, in other contexts, in a previous version of her life that she was apparently not as finished with as she'd believed. The feeling was supposed to be helplessness. She drank the coffee she didn't want and thought about Pavel, and thought about Damien Crow's face in the news photograph, that comfortable, camera-ready smile, and thought about the specific arithmetic of her situation, which was as follows. A man with significant resources had decided she was useful as a pressure point against Lucian Vale, based on 2 documented interactions, neither of which constituted any kind of actual relationship. Crow's read was wrong, his intelligence was incomplete, and incomplete intelligence was the most dangerous kind, because the person acting on it moved with full confidence toward conclusions that didn't match the terrain. She needed to understand how wrong he was, and how fast he was going to find out. She called Lucian. "There's a sedan," she said when he picked up. "Silver. It picked me up when I left your building. It's not following me into locations, just maintaining visual on street level." "I know about the sedan." His voice was tighter than it had been an hour ago. "Rook made it 30 seconds after you left. We've been running the plate." "And?" "Registered to a numbered company. 3rd shell in a sequence. We're working backward." A pause. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm in a coffee shop on Dundas." She looked at the entrance again. 2 people had come in since she sat down. A young woman with a stroller. An old man in a raincoat who went immediately to the counter without looking at anyone. Neither of them interesting. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. All right. How many people in your organization know about me? The pause was a fraction of a second too long. Lucien. 4 people, he said. Rook, my operations coordinator, a woman named Sable. Marcus, who is currently not in a position to tell anyone anything. And my second instructor, a man named Drev. Another pause. Drev has been with me for 7 years. She heard what he wasn't saying, but Crow moved on the information inside 48 hours of our first meeting, and the only way he had access to your name and your background inside that window is if someone told him. His voice was very flat. Which means I have a problem that predates you. She sat with that for a moment. The coffee was getting cold. The old man in the raincoat was reading a newspaper at the counter, completely unbothered by the world. Call a meeting, she said. All 4 of them, today. If I call a meeting and one of them is running information to Crow, I tip my hand. You're already tipped. She kept her voice low. He already moved, Lucien. He already called me. The question isn't whether he knows you're aware of the leak. The question is whether you find it before he uses it again. She picked up her cup, set it down again without drinking. Call the meeting. Watch their faces when you tell them about the call I received this morning. Silence. Where will you be? He said. Work. At 6. She stood, picked up her bag. Text me when it's done. She walked out. The silver sedan was gone from the corner. That was either better or worse. She didn't know which yet. She spent the next 4 hours doing the thing she was best at, which was functioning with total external normality, while her interior machinery worked on a separate problem. She went to the library on St. George and used a public terminal to research Damien Crow with the methodical patience of someone who understood that what a person allowed to be publicly visible was itself a form of information. She cross-referenced the news coverage with property records, with corporate filings, with the particular geography of the incidents attributed to his organization over the past 2 years. She built a picture. It was incomplete because all pictures at this stage were incomplete, but it had enough shape that she could read the outline. Crow was not impulsive. Every move attributed to him over 7 years of coverage had a clear strategic logic when you laid them out in sequence. The aggression of the past 8 months wasn't a change in character. It was a change in timeline. Something had accelerated his schedule. The question was what? She wrote nothing down, memorized everything, closed the browser, went to work. Basic. The shift was quiet for the first 3 hours, which in an emergency room meant something was coming. It came at 10:14 in the form of a man she didn't recognize, walking into the ER bay not through the ambulance entrance but through the public doors, wearing a jacket too light for the weather and moving with the deliberate straightness of someone who was working hard to appear uninjured. He wasn't a patient. She read that in the first 2 seconds. He was upright, his color was good, his eyes were tracking correctly. He was looking for something, not seeking help. His eyes found her. He came directly to her station without stopping at triage. Ms. Mercer. Not a question. She set down the chart she was holding. You need to check in at triage. I'm not here as a patient. He kept his voice low. He had an accent she couldn't immediately place. Eastern European, possibly, worn down by years somewhere else. Mr. Crow would like a conversation. She looked at him without expression. Mr. Crow can make an appointment. He doesn't think you understand the urgency. I work in an emergency room. I understand urgency better than most. She held his gaze. You're in my place of work. You're going to turn around and walk out the same way you came in, and you're going to tell your employer that this approach was a mistake. The man's expression didn't change. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, the gesture of someone who wanted her to know he was reaching in, and produced a phone. He turned it toward her. The screen showed a photograph. Her apartment building on Ossington, taken from across the street at an angle that captured the entrance and the 4th floor windows, her windows, with the particular quality of light that meant it had been taken that morning, while she was already gone. And in the lower corner of the photograph, just visible at the edge of the frame, a woman. Older, heavy-set, gray hair in a braid. Her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, who brought Kaya soup when she worked doubles and asked after her health with the specific persistence of someone who'd decided Kaya was her project. Kaya looked at the photograph for exactly 3 seconds. She felt something happen in her chest. Not fear, something older and colder and more specific. The thing that happened when a threat moved from abstract to concrete, and the concrete had a face you recognized. She handed the phone back. "Tell Mr. Crow," she said, "that I'll be in touch." The man took the phone. He looked at her for a moment, assessing or perhaps surprised that she hadn't reacted the way he expected. Then he turned and walked out. Petra materialized at her elbow approximately 4 seconds later. "Who was that?" Petra said. "Wrong door," Kaya said. "He was looking for radiology." Petra did not believe this. Petra communicated her disbelief with the efficiency of someone who had known Kaya for 2.5 years. But she also, being Petra, understood that there were moments when the right thing to do was press, and moments when it wasn't, and she filed this one in the second category and went back to her work. Kaya went to the supply room. She stood in the supply room for 90 seconds with her back against the shelving and her eyes closed and her hands pressing flat against the cold metal shelf behind her. Mrs. Calloway made soup. She asked about Kaya's sleep schedule. She had a son in Mississauga and a cat named Biscuit, and she had never done anything to anyone except be kind to a neighbor who didn't always deserve it. Kaya opened her eyes. She took out her phone and called Lucian. He picked up before the second ring. "They sent someone to my hospital," she said. "A messenger. He showed me a photograph of my building and a woman who lives in it." The silence on the other end of the line had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Something underneath the control. Something with heat in it. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine. I need you to have someone at my building, not watching it, inside it. My neighbor on the third floor, her name is Calloway. Kaya stopped, steadied herself. "She needs to not be accessible to these people." Done. No hesitation, no negotiation. "What else?" "I need the results of the meeting." Another pause. This one had a different quality. Heavier. "I need to tell you that in person," he said. "Boisson." She went to him at 2 in the morning, still in her scrubs, because there hadn't been time to change, and because she'd stopped caring about the optics of the situation approximately 6 hours ago. Rook met her at the door. His face told her something before Lucian did. Rook's face was the kind of controlled that required active effort, and there were small failures in the control tonight. Around the eyes. In the set of his mouth. Lucien was in this conference room. He was standing again, back to the room, but this time when she came in he turned immediately, and she saw it plainly. He was angry. The specific, quiet, terrifying anger of someone who had been hurt in a place they'd believed was protected. "Tell me," she said. He didn't lead up to it. "It's Drev." The name landed in the room. 7 years, she said. 7 years. He said it without inflection, which was the worst way to say it. Sable found a communication thread this afternoon, encrypted, but she's been sitting on the decryption keys for Crow's network for 2 months, and nobody knew she had them, including me, because she was building a case and she wanted it complete before she brought it. He stopped, pressed his knuckles against the edge of the conference table. The thread goes back 4 months. Drev has been feeding Crow operational details, schedules, personnel movements, the location of the meeting where Marcus was shot. He stopped again. Shorter this time. Elise's... The name caught somewhere. He cleared it. "There's a message in the thread. From 6 weeks ago. Drev describing the gap in my organization. The thing Crow was looking for. Someone who could keep my people alive under fire." His jaw worked. Drev told him I was actively looking. He told him what to watch for. Kaya was very still. "Which means Crow wasn't reacting to us," she said slowly. "He was ahead of us." Lucian looked at her. "He knew I was looking for someone with your specific skills before I found you. Which means the moment you walked into the Meridian Grand, he was already positioned to use it." She felt the pieces rearrange themselves into a shape she didn't like. "The call from Pavel, the photograph of my building. That wasn't opportunistic. He had a plan ready." "Yes." She sat down without being invited to. She needed to sit down. Not from shock, from the specific cognitive weight of recalculating an entire situation from new foundations. "Where's Drev now?" she said. "Gone." Lucian said the word like it tasted wrong. "He made us making him by about 3 hours. His apartment is cleared out. He's in the wind. He'll go to Crow." "Yes." "Which means Crow now knows that you know." She looked at the table. which means the timeline just collapsed. Whatever he was planning, he moves it up, now. Lucian pulled out the chair across from her and sat down hard, the way you sat when you were done managing how you looked. He put both hands flat on the table and stared at them for a moment. He looked in that moment like what he actually was. A man in his early 30s who had spent his entire adult life in a landscape that ate loyalty for breakfast and had just discovered that one of the people he'd trusted most had been feeding him to something larger than himself for 4 months. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked up. "For what?" "For whatever made Drev think that was worth doing." She held his gaze. "That calculation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Someone made him an offer that was better than what he had, and the fact that he took it doesn't come from nowhere." "You're defending him." "No, I'm trying to understand the structure of the problem." She leaned forward slightly. "If I'm going to help you, I need to understand the whole structure, not just the part where he betrayed you, the part before that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You said you're going to help me." She had said that, without deciding to. She heard it come out of her own mouth and recognized it as something that had been building since the parking structure, since the consultation room, since the photograph of Mrs. Calloway at the corner of a frame. "I said if," she said. "Conditional." "Right." A fractional shift in his expression, not quite a smile, something adjacent. "Sable," she said. "The communications thread. Can she get deeper into Crow's network?" "She's already in deeper than I realized she was. I had a conversation with her tonight that was," he paused, "illuminating. She's been running her own operation in parallel with mine for 6 months, gathering. She didn't tell me because she wasn't sure I'd sanction it." "Would you have?" "Honestly, I don't know." He looked at the table again. "I'm reassessing several things I thought I knew about my own judgment." She understood that. She understood it at a specific frequency that was personal, from 3 years ago. From the decision she'd made that had cost her everything she was before and given her everything she had now. "Get Sable on Crow's communications for the next 48 hours, she said. "Not deep penetration, surface traffic. I want to know if there's an acceleration in message volume, if Drev going to him changes his operational tempo. And if it does, then we have less time than we think, and we need to know that now, not when someone walks into my ER again." He nodded. He looked like a man receiving orders, which was not, she guessed, a thing that happened to him regularly. He didn't resist it. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "The thing Drev told Crow, about what I was looking for." He was precise with his words, the way he was precise with everything. He didn't just tell him I was looking for someone with medical skills. He told him why. A breath. He told him about Elise. The room went very quiet. Kaya looked at him and understood from the set of his face and the specific stillness around his eyes what it cost him to say that. Not because Elise was a secret in the operational sense, because Elise was the part of himself he kept separate from everything that his life had made him, and Drev had taken that and handed it to an enemy who would use it as a tool. "He'll use it to find your threshold," she said, "where you stop making rational decisions." "I know. You need to know that about yourself before he triggers it." "I know that too." He looked at her. "Diko, that's why I'm telling you." She held his gaze. He was telling her because she was the only person in this room, possibly in his current life, who he thought would give him a straight answer rather than the answer he wanted. She wasn't sure when she'd become that person to him. She wasn't sure how she felt about being that person to him. She filed that question in the same box as everything else that was going to need examination later, when there was time for examination. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from an unknown number, the third unknown number in 3 days. "Nurse, check the news. Channel 7. Now." She showed the screen to Lucian. He was already reaching for the laptop on the credenza before she'd fully extended her hand. The Channel 7 news stream loaded. The banner at the bottom of the screen was red, which meant breaking, and the anchor was speaking with the particular controlled urgency of someone who had just received information mid-broadcast and was processing it live. A body had been found in a warehouse in the East End. Male. Identification was pending, but sources close to the investigation had indicated that the individual had known associations with organized crime and that the manner of death suggested a targeted killing. The street address appeared in the scroll at the bottom. Lucian's hand stopped moving on the laptop. Kaya looked at the address and then looked at him. Do you recognize that location? That's one of my storage facilities. His voice had gone very flat. One that Drev would have known about. The body. Yes. Crow. Yes. She understood what she was looking at. The body was a message, placed in a location that would draw investigative attention to Lucian's operation, deliberately timed to appear immediately after Drev's disappearance. It was elegant in a horrible way. Crow hadn't just flipped Lucian's insider, he'd weaponized the vacancy Drev left, and he'd moved within hours of Drev making contact. This was not 8 months of aggression. This was the final sequence of a plan that had been running for much longer. He's been building to this, she said, specifically to this. Drev wasn't an opportunity. Drev was recruited, deliberately, for this exact purpose. She looked at Lucian. How long has Drev been in your organization? 7 years? And Crow's acceleration started 8 months ago. She did the arithmetic out loud, not because she needed to, but because he needed to hear it. That means Crow placed someone in your organization 6 years before he started moving against you. He's been patient for 6 years, Lucian. That's not opportunism. That's architecture. Lucian stared at the laptop screen. The news anchor was still talking, gesturing toward a graphic that showed the east end of the city. He planned this from the beginning, Lucian said. Not the beginning, but long enough ago that by the time he moved, every piece was already in place. She stood up. She felt the shift happening in herself. The thing she'd been holding back since the Meridian Grand, the part of her that had been trained for exactly this kind of landscape, and that she had been telling herself for 3 years she was done with. She felt it surface. She didn't push it back down. Which means the question isn't what he's going to do next. The question is what he already did that we haven't found yet. What do you mean? He put Drev in 7 years ago. He used Sable's network intercepts to track your organizational gaps. He planned a body placement at a location that draws official scrutiny to you within hours of his inside man going active. She looked at him. He's thorough, Lucian. He's extremely thorough, which means there are pieces already on the board that we haven't seen. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. She looked at the screen. The nurse has a prior identity, discharged for conduct in the field. You should ask Lucian what he knows. She read the text, read it again. The words were engineered. She recognized the architecture of them. Ask Lucian what he knows. Designed to put distance between them. Designed to trigger exactly the kind of question that would cost them the only working trust in the room. She turned the phone screen toward Lucian without a word. He read it. His face didn't move. Well, she said. Do you? He held her gaze. Do I what? Know something about my prior identity. She kept her voice even. Because this is the moment where you tell me everything you actually know, or this conversation ends and I walk out and neither of us has what we need. He looked at her for a long moment. I ran you, he said, after the hotel. I had Sable run your background. He said it without apology, but without deflection. She found the same gap you have. Nothing before 29, a clean identity, professionally done. The kind that costs serious money or serious favors. He paused. She found one thing. A service record. Military, Canadian Forces, but the details are sealed. Classification level we couldn't crack. There's a notation in the accessible portion. Another pause. Conduct review, 2021. The outcome is sealed. The room was very quiet. She felt the cold thing again, in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something older. The specific weight of a chapter you'd closed and sealed and apparently not locked well enough. Crow has access to sealed military records, she said, or someone who does. Which is worse. She took her phone back, put it in her pocket. The conduct review was closed in my favor, she said. The action I was reviewed for was the right call in the field, and the review board confirmed it. I left afterward because the right call cost people I worked with a relationship they couldn't recover, and working in that environment after that was… She stopped, found the right word. Untenable. Lucian said nothing. I'm telling you this, she said, because Crow is going to use it, and I'd rather you hear it from me. I am not what that text is implying. I am not a liability. I am not someone whose past is going to be used against you. A pause. But I'm someone whose past is about to be used against me, and I need you to understand that those are different things. He held her gaze the way he'd held it in the hotel lobby, in the parking structure, in the consultation room. That quality of attention that wasn't calculation, or wasn't only calculation. I know they're different things, he said. Outside, the city was doing what it always did at 2 in the morning, generating its constant low-frequency noise, the sound of a million people existing in parallel. Inside the conference room, the laptop was still streaming the news anchor, who had moved on to the next story with the professional ease of someone who'd spent his career treating catastrophe as content. Kaya's phone buzzed a third time. She looked at the screen and felt something happen in her stomach that she didn't immediately have a name for. The text was a photograph. Taken inside a building. Interior walls, fluorescent overhead light, the particular institutional green of a corridor she would have recognized anywhere because she walked it 6 days a week. St. Aurelius General. The corridor outside the trauma bay. And in the foreground, seated in the plastic chair outside triage, a man she didn't recognize, heavyset, watching the corridor, with a text beneath the image that read, "He's been there since midnight. He knows your shifts. He knows your colleague's name. He knows where she parks her car. We want the same thing you want, nurse," Lucian Vale contained. "Help us do that, or the people around you stop being safe." She turned the phone so Lucian could see it. He read it, his jaw set. "Petra," Kaya said. Her voice sounded very calm. She recognized the calm. It was not peace, it was the absolute convergence of every decision narrowing to a single point, all the other options falling away until there was only what had to happen next. "Her name is Petra. She parks on the second level of the structure on Elm." She looked at Lucian. "If anything happens to her because I walked into your hotel lobby, I will not forgive you." "Nothing will happen to her." He was already reaching for his own phone. "No." She put her hand on his arm. He stopped. She looked at him. "I'll handle it." She took a breath. "I know how to move these people. I know the geometry of this kind of pressure." She felt something settle into place in her chest, something she hadn't felt settle in 3 years. The cold, specific weight of her own competence, the part of herself she'd been keeping in a box sealed with the word, "done." "You give me everything Sable has on Crow's East End operation. Location, personnel, structure. You give me access to Rook and 2 other people you trust without question. And you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without asking me to explain it in the moment." She looked at him. "Can you do that?" He looked at her. Something in his face shifted in a way she hadn't seen before, the managed surface giving way to something more direct. "Yes," he said. "Good." She took her hand off his arm. "Because Crow just made the mistake of coming at someone I care about, and the last person who did that—" She stopped herself, locked that sentence back in its box. "Call Sable. Tell her we need everything she has by 6 a.m. She picked up her bag. "I'm going back to my hospital. I'm going to walk past the man sitting outside triage, and I'm going to let him see me, and I'm going to let him report to Crow that I went back to work like nothing happened." She looked at the door. "Because that's exactly what I want Crow to think right now." She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. She had come to Toronto 3 years ago with a new name and a decided life, and the absolute conviction that the person she'd been was a version of herself she was finished with. She turned around. "Lucienne." He looked at her. "My name before Mercer," she said. "You don't need to know it. Crow doesn't get to use it. But I want you to understand that whoever that person was—" She paused. Let the sentence find its end. She was very good at what she did. She walked out. Behind her, in the conference room, Lucian Vale sat with both hands flat on the table and the news still streaming on the laptop and the weight of a 7-year betrayal and the specific feeling, one he hadn't had in a long time, since before Elise, since before the organization had grown large enough to feel like something that owned him rather than the other way around, of having, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, someone in his corner who was not afraid of what they were about to walk into. Outside, the city was cold and wet and completely indifferent. Inside, St. Aurelius General, a heavy-set man in the plastic chair outside triage, shifted in his seat and looked at his phone and did not notice the woman who walked past him at 3:14 in the morning, scrubs and damp jacket, hospital badge clipped correctly this time, who glanced at him once with the particular quality of attention that registered everything and gave nothing back, and continued to the nurse's station without breaking stride. He sent a text. She arrived. Back to work. He had no idea what he was looking at. That was going to cost him. Sable was not what Kaya had expected. She had constructed, from the limited information Lucien had given her, a mental image of someone operational, background in signals intelligence or technology, the kind of person who existed in periphery and processed information other people acted on. What she got, at 6:17 in the morning in the second-floor conference room, was a woman in her late 20s with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the specific flat-eyed quality of someone who had been awake for 22 hours and was not impressed by that fact or by anything else in the room. Sable looked at Kaya the way she might look at a document she hadn't decided how to classify yet. "You're the nurse," she said. "I'm Kaya. I know who you are. I ran your background." She said it without apology, without the slight defensiveness Lucien had used. Pure statement of fact. "Your prior identity is cleaner than I expected for a field exit. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. I built it myself." Sable's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. "That's why it's clean." Rook was in the corner, arms crossed, watching this exchange with the specific patience of a man who had learned that most problems resolved themselves faster if he didn't intervene. Lucien stood at the window. The city outside was doing its pre-dawn thing, the particular gray quality of Toronto at 6 a.m., the light not yet committed to being day. Kaya sat down across from Sable and put her hands flat on the table. "What do you have on Crow's East End structure?" Sable opened a laptop and turned it. The screen showed a network diagram. Names, locations, connecting lines annotated with dates and communication frequencies. Kaya looked at it for 60 seconds without speaking, reading it the way she read a patient chart, identifying the critical pathways, the dependencies, the single points of failure. "His command structure is flatter than it looks from outside," she said. "Yes." Sable leaned forward. For the first time, there was something in her voice that wasn't assessment, something closer to the specific energy of someone who had been sitting on information and was finally allowed to use it. "He runs a 4-person operational core. Pavel you've met. There's a logistics coordinator named Thresh, a finance layer that I haven't fully cracked, and a security head, former law enforcement, name of Breyer." She tapped the screen. "The weak point is Thresh. He's sloppy with his communication hygiene. He uses personal devices for operational traffic, and he has a pattern. He always acknowledges receipt of instructions within 4 minutes. We can spoof an instruction and clock the response," Kaya said. Sable looked at her. "Yes. And the response tells us which device he's using, which gives us his location. If he's at a fixed point, yes." Kaya looked at the diagram again. "Crow's been accelerating his timeline since Drev went to him. What's the communication volume look like in the last 8 hours? Sable pulled up a different window. "Up 400%. He's moving something." She scrolled. "There are references to a location. They're not naming it in the traffic. They're using a reference code, Delta 7. I haven't placed it yet." "Delta 7, Lucien sighed from his window without turning around. "That's a restaurant designation. We use a similar system." He turned. His face had the quality it had in the parking structure. The surface was intact, but underneath it something was running very hot. "Crow has a flagship property, warehouse conversion in the distillery district. He uses it for meetings. He calls it the Foundry." Sable was already typing, cross-referencing. "He's calling a meeting," Kaya said, "at the Foundry, which means he's bringing his operational core together, which means he's moving to the next phase." She looked at Lucien. "When?" "Traffic density suggests within 24 hours, Sable said. The room went quiet for a moment. Kaya felt the convergence of it, all the pieces of the past 72 hours assembling themselves into a single forward-pointing arrow. Crow had architecture in place. He had Drev's intelligence. He had the photograph of Petra and the man outside St. Aurelius and the infrastructure of a plan that had been running for 6 years underneath the surface of the city, patient and thorough, waiting for exactly this acceleration. "If we wait for him to move, we're reactive," she said, "and reactive is where he wants us." "Agreed," Lucien said. "Then we need to be inside that meeting." Rook uncrossed his arms. "Inside it how?" She looked at the network diagram on Sable's screen, at Thresh and his sloppy communication hygiene and his 4-minute acknowledgement window. We give Crow a reason to add a name to his table, she said. The next 14 hours were the most focused she'd been in 3 years. Not the focused of emergency medicine, which was reactive by nature, which required a particular quality of attention that was always catching up to what was already happening. This was the other kind, the kind she'd learned before medicine, in environments where being a step behind meant not being a step at all. Perspective. Anticipatory. The kind of focus that looked like stillness from outside and felt like controlled fire from inside. She worked with Sable on the communication intercept while Rook ran logistics, and Lucian moved through the building with the particular energy of a man who had identified a direction and was done waiting to move in it. Marcus had been transferred to a private facility that morning. Lucien's arrangement, a thoracic specialist, everything Kaya had specified. And the knowledge of that sat somewhere in her chest as a small fixed point of something that wasn't relief exactly, but was adjacent. The Thresh intercept worked at 2:17 in the afternoon. Sable spoofed an instruction from Crow's primary communications channel, kept it minimal and logistically specific. A delivery confirmation, the kind of traffic that required acknowledgement but no elaboration. Thresh responded in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The device signature gave them an IP address that Sable walked back to a physical location inside 12 minutes. He's in a condo on Parliament, she said. 10th floor. He's been stationary for 6 hours. Which means he's staging, Kaya said. He's not moving until the meeting. Or he's waiting for Crow to move him. Same thing. She looked at the map Sable had pulled up. Parliament Street ran north-south through the East End, and the condo building Sable had identified was 4 blocks from the Foundry. Close enough to be convenient, close enough that if Thresh was pulled to the meeting location, she'd have approximately 8 minutes of transit to work with. When Thresh moves, I need to know instantly. I'll have a continuous ping on the device, Sable said. What's your play? Rook asked. He'd moved from the corner to the table at some point in the past hour, which she took as a sign of engagement. He looked at her with the same reading a document quality Sable had, but with more experience behind it. The assessment of someone who had been in enough operational situations to know that plans were one thing and execution was another, and the gap between them was where people got killed. She laid it out. She was precise. She didn't editorialize, didn't over-explain, gave him the structure and the contingencies, and let him identify the weaknesses, which he did, efficiently and without ego, and which she incorporated where they were valid. Lucian listened to all of it and asked 2 questions, and both questions were the right ones. At 4 p.m., she called Petra. Petra picked up on the 3rd ring. You're not on shift tonight. I know. Are you at the hospital? Just leaving. Why? I need you to not go to your car in the structure on Elm. Kaya kept her voice level. I need you to go to the main entrance and call your sister and have her pick you up. Don't argue with me. A pause. Kaya, what is happening? I'll explain everything. Not tonight. Tomorrow, in daylight, over coffee, I will explain everything and you can be as angry as you need to be. She felt something tighten in her throat. Tonight I need you to do what I said. Another pause. Longer. My sister lives in Scarborough, Petra said. She's going to complain the whole way. Let her complain. Okay. Petra's voice had gone quieter. The version of Petra that didn't need things explained to her. Okay. Thank you. Kaya hung up before the tightness in her throat became something audible. She looked up. Lucian was watching her from across the room. She's safe? He said. She will be. Kaya set the phone down. Now we wait. Cool. Thresh moved at 9:48 p.m. Sable's alert came in as a single word, moving. Kaya was already in her jacket. The plan was not complicated because complicated plans failed at the points of complexity, and she wanted as few of those as possible. Rook had 2 people at the Foundry's perimeter, not inside, not visible, just present. Sable would maintain the communication intercept and feed them real-time traffic. Lucien would arrive at the Foundry as himself, responding to what they had constructed as a meeting request from a neutral third party, a fiction Sable had seeded into Crow's network intelligence 3 hours ago. Credible enough, specific enough, the kind of thing that would pull Crow to a table rather than push him to a confrontation. And Kaya would be inside before Lucian walked through the door. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you this is a bad idea, Rook said, as she checked her jacket pockets in the stairwell. Is it a bad idea? He thought about it with the honesty of someone who didn't comfort people by default. It's the best bad idea we have. Good enough. She went in through the service entrance at the east side of the foundry, which was open because Sable had communicated a delivery notification to the building's management system 40 minutes ago. The interior was the renovated warehouse it announced itself as. Exposed brick, high ceilings, industrial fixtures that had been made decorative, the kind of space that cost enormous money to look like it cost no money at all. The main floor was set for a gathering, tables, chairs, the particular arrangement of a room where business was going to be conducted in the language of hospitality. She moved through the service corridor to a position overlooking the main floor and settled in to wait. Crow arrived at 10:23 with 4 people and the specific comfort of a man who considered this ground his own. He was taller than his photograph suggested, and the comfortable and expensive clothing quality translated directly from print to person. He moved through the room the way people moved through spaces they owned, not quickly, not with any apparent awareness that he should be in a hurry. Pavel was with him. She recognized the flat voice before she confirmed the face. Thresh arrived 5 minutes later, breathing slightly too fast for someone who had just walked 4 blocks. Drev walked in at 10:31, and the cold thing in her chest turned into something sharp. He looked exactly like someone who had made a decision and was living with it. Not comfortable, but committed. He sat at the table Crow indicated and didn't look around the room, with the awareness of someone who expected to be looked for. He thought he was safe here. She noted his position, she noted the exits, she noted where Pavel stood and where Breyer, the security head, former law enforcement, she'd matched his face to Sable's briefing, stationed himself near the main entrance with the practiced positioning of someone who knew what he was doing. Her earpiece activated. Sable's voice, quiet. Lucien is 90 seconds out. She pressed the acknowledgement point on her wrist, a tiny motion that produced no sound. Below her, Crow was speaking, his voice carried in the high-ceilinged space, not because he was projecting, but because he didn't see any reason to lower it. Vale agreed to the meeting, he was saying, which tells us his intelligence is worse than I'd hoped. He doesn't know about Drev yet. He looked at Drev. He doesn't know? He knows I'm gone, Drev said. His voice was flat. The voice of someone who had already paid the emotional invoice for what he'd done and was now operating on the far side of it. He doesn't know how deep. Good. Crow moved around the table. When he walks in, we're not negotiating. I want him to understand that the offer I'm making is the only architecture left. His East End operation folds into mine, his personnel transfer under my command, and he walks away. A pause. The alternative is that the body we placed at his facility is the first of several. He won't agree, Pavel said. He won't agree tonight, Crow said, but the woman changes his arithmetic, the nurse. He said it with the tone of someone noting a useful tool. She matters to him more than he realizes yet. People like Vale always have one thing they'll burn everything else to protect, and they don't know what it is until you put pressure on it. He sat down at the head of the table. She's the pressure. She felt her jaw tighten and made it relax. Lucien's arriving, Sable said in her ear. 20 seconds later, the main doors opened and Lucien walked in with Rook at his shoulder and nobody else, which was what they'd agreed. Minimal footprint, maximum red of the room. He looked at the table, looked at Crow, looked at Drev without any visible reaction, though she knew what it cost him, and the fact that he held the surface meant he was everything she'd assessed him to be, and possibly more. Damien, Lucien said. Lucien, Crow gestured at the table. Sit down. I'll stand. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. Easy, unhurried. You wanted a conversation. I want an agreement. Crow tilted his head slightly. You're going to find this one very straightforward. I doubt that. The East End territory, your personnel, your distribution infrastructure. Crow laid it out the way you laid out something that was already decided. In exchange, you walk away, clean. Nobody follows you. Nobody touches your people. Lucien looked at him. Nobody touches my people now. Marcus, Crow said. Just the name. Lucien's jaw moved once. That was a message. This is also a message. Crow folded his hands on the table. The difference is this message comes with an exit. I'm offering you one. Most people in your position don't get one. And the nurse? Lucien said. Something shifted in the room. A minute change in the quality of attention, The way a room changed when the thing everyone was actually talking about was finally named. She stays out of it, Crow said. As long as you cooperate, she's invisible to me. She goes back to her hospital, her life, her colleague with the car on Elm. He said Petra's detail without emphasis, which made it more threatening than emphasis would have. Clean. Lucian looked at him. That's the offer. That's the offer. I need to think about it. Crow looked at him with the patience of someone who had already won and was allowing the other party the dignity of arriving at that conclusion on their own schedule. You have until morning. Then I'll use the night. Lucian looked at Drev one more time. Drev held the look, which told her he'd been prepared for it. Lucien looked away first, not from weakness, from decision. He turned and walked out with Rook, and the doors closed behind them, and the room recalibrated. Kaya was already moving. She had 40 seconds before Crow's security completed the post-meeting sweep that Breyer would order, because he was thorough, and he wouldn't leave the room without confirming it was clean. 40 seconds was enough if she moved now and moved correctly. She was back in the service corridor and out the east entrance in 34 seconds. The alley behind the foundry was cold and narrow, and she stood in it for a moment with her back against the brick wall, and her breath coming in visible clouds, and her hands very steady. Her phone buzzed. Lucien. I'm outside, she said. I know. Rook has eyes on the exit. A pause. You heard. Everything. Kaya, don't. She pushed off the wall, started walking. Don't do what you're about to do. What am I about to do? Tell me this changes your calculation, that you're considering Crow's offer. Silence. You're considering it, she said. I'm considering that he knows where Petra parks her car. His voice was controlled, and the control was the whole of it, nothing underneath except the thing he was working to keep under. I'm considering that he has Drev's intelligence, which means he knows more about my organization than I've fully accounted for, and that every day this continues is another day he can reach someone else. He stopped. She waited. Someone else I'm not willing to lose, he said. She walked to the end of the alley and stopped at the corner. The street was quiet at this hour. The distillery district closed down early on weeknights, the restaurants and galleries locked up, only a few vehicles on the cobblestone. The city felt for a moment very empty. I need you to listen to me, she said. And I need you to hear it as someone who is not telling you what you want to hear, because that's not a service I'm prepared to offer. All right? If you accept Crow's offer, he owns you. Not your territory, you. Because the moment he has your agreement under this kind of pressure, he has the template. He knows it works. He will use it every time he needs something, and the thing he needs will grow. She kept her voice even. You think the offer is about the East End territory. It isn't. It's about establishing a mechanism. He wants to know if you can be moved. A long silence. And can I be? Lucian said. Quiet. Real. I don't know, she said. I've known you for 4 days, but I know what happens when someone with his architecture gets a yes from someone with yours. I've seen it, and the aftermath is worse than the alternative. What's the alternative? We end it. She said it without drama. Not his organization. We can't end that. But we end his play for yours. We take the pieces he's moved onto the board, and we move them differently. She looked at the cobblestones. I have a plan. You've had a plan since 3 a.m. I've had a direction since 3 a.m. The plan needed tonight's information. She started walking again. Get Rook and Sable to your building. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She disconnected. She walked the 4 blocks to where she'd left the car Rook had arranged for her, a nondescript domestic sedan, nothing memorable. And she drove through the late-night streets with her hands correct on the wheel and her mind running at a speed she hadn't asked it to run at in 3 years, but which it apparently had maintained in readiness without being asked. She thought about Crow's voice when he said the nurse changes his arithmetic. She thought about Elise's name in Drev's mouth in a communication thread. She thought about Petra's voice saying, my sister lives in Scarborough, and the way it had sounded, annoyed and steady and completely trusting. She thought about the moment in the conference room when she'd said she would help and heard it come out of her own mouth, like something that had been waiting to be said. She parked on the street outside Lucian's building and sat in the car for 30 seconds. Just 30. The kind of moment you were allowed before you stopped being allowed. Then she got out and went inside. The plan required 3 things: Sable's access to Crow's communication network, A piece of information that Kaya had been sitting on since her research in the library on St. George and Drev. The third element was the one that made the room go quiet when she named it. Drev, Rook said. Not a question. The tone of a man confirming he'd heard something correctly before responding to it. He's sitting in a room with Crow right now believing that what he did is final, she said. It isn't. The intelligence he gave Crow has a shelf life, and Drev knows things about the expiration of that intelligence that Crow doesn't know he knows. She looked at Lucian. He was with you for 7 years. He knows where the bodies are, literally and otherwise. He knows which of your operations Crow doesn't have visibility on yet. He knows the parts of your structure that are still intact. She paused. And he knows that Crow's offer to you tonight was the clean version. The version where everyone walks away. Which means Drev still has a line in his head about what this is supposed to be. Lucian looked at her steadily. You think he has a conscience? I think he has a calculation. And I think the calculation changed tonight when he sat at that table and heard Crow name Petra's parking structure. She held Lucian's gaze. There's a version of what Drev did that comes from money or fear or both. There is no version of it that includes civilian targeting, because that's a different category of thing, and people who make the first kind of choice don't always make the second. You're speculating, Rook said. I'm reading pattern. She looked at him. I've been wrong before, but not about this type. Another silence. How do we reach him? Lucian said. Sable spoofs a message from inside Crow's network, something that looks like a logistics query from Thresh. Gets Drev to a location alone. She looked at Sable. Can you do it? Sable looked back at her with the 2mm expression shift that meant yes and was not going to say it more elaborately than that. There's a risk, Rook said. If Crow's running Drev, if Drev reports the contact, then we lose the element and adjust, Kaya said. But if we're right, we gain something more valuable than anything else in the current position. She looked at all of them. We gain someone inside Crow's room who is looking for a reason to change direction. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something and choosing to step forward. Do it, he said to Sable. Sable started typing. Kaya moved to the window. Outside, the city was dark and wet, and the lights ran all the way to the horizon, the way they always did, indifferent and constant. The city existing in its own massive continuity, regardless of what happened inside any particular building on any particular night. Her reflection was visible in the glass. She looked at it for a moment. She looked like herself. The herself of the last 3 years. The careful constructed version, Kaya Mercer, ER nurse. But there was something else in the set of her shoulders and the quality of her eyes that the careful construction didn't quite cover anymore. She had stopped being done the moment she'd walked into the Meridian Grand. She understood that now. You didn't stop being what you were. You made choices about how you used it. That was the whole of the distinction. Message sent, Sable said. We'll know in 4 minutes if he bites. The room went quiet. Kaya watched the city and counted the seconds and felt her heartbeat in her palms, which was not fear, which was not hesitation, which was the specific physical state of a person who had committed to a direction and was running in it, and the world had narrowed to exactly the width of the path. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, Sable said, He responded. Kaya turned from the window. Sable's face was doing its 2mm shift again. He wants to meet, she said. He named a location. She paused. He named it in a code that's not from Crow's network. She looked at Kaya. It's from yours. Kaya went very still. The location code Sable was showing her on the screen was from a system she had built herself 3 years ago in the process of constructing Kaya Mercer from the ground up. A private notation system she'd used during that period, never shared, never documented, existing in her own records and nowhere else. Drev had used it, which meant Drev had access to something from her prior life that she had not given him, had not given anyone in this city. She looked at the screen and felt the floor of the situation drop away beneath her, and something colder and more specific than anything she'd felt in the past 4 days settle into her bones. Who is Drev? She said. Her voice was very quiet. What? Lucian said. She looked at him. Who is Drev, really? Not the cover story. Not the 7 years. She held his gaze. Because the code he just used doesn't exist in any system he should have access to. It exists in a system I built for myself and never shared. And the only way he has it is if he was watching me before you ever found me." She felt the thing click into place with the specific horror of an answer that explained everything and made everything worse simultaneously. "Crow didn't find me because of you. He found you because of me." She felt her breath leave her. "I was the target. You were the access point." The room was absolutely silent. Lucien was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the managed surface, not the grief underneath, something rawer than either. The expression of a man understanding that the architecture of a situation was fundamentally different from what he'd believed, that the ground under his feet had been shaped by a force he hadn't accounted for, that he had been, for the first time in a long time, genuinely and completely in the dark. "Kaya," he said. "6 years," she said. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her, but it held. "Crow has been building this for 6 years. He didn't put Drev in your organization to get to you." She felt the cold clarity of it, the horrible, clean logic. "He put Drev in your organization because your organization was how he was going to get to me." Outside, the city continued its indifferent existence. Inside, in the room, the silence held the weight of 6 years of patient architecture finally revealing its foundation, and the foundation was her name. The real one, the one she'd buried, the one that apparently not everyone had allowed to stay buried. And beneath that name was a history she had closed and sealed, and apparently someone had kept the key. Her hands were very still at her sides. Lucien took a step toward her. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. She had 48 hours, possibly less, before whatever Crow had set in motion reached its final position, and she had a plan that had just lost its foundation and needed to be rebuilt from new information, and she had a man standing 3 feet from her who had trusted her with his people and his grief and the name of his dead sister, and she owed him the same quality of truth. She opened her mouth and began to tell him who she had been before she was Kaya Mercer, and the city outside went on doing what cities did, and the night sat on top of everything like a held breath before the last thing broke open. Her real name was Kaya Voss. She said it without preamble, without softening it, the way you said something that had weight and didn't want to pretend otherwise. The name sat in the room for a moment before she continued, and in that moment she watched Lucien's face and saw him file it, not reacting, not reassessing, just receiving. She had been Kaya Voss for 29 years, Canadian Forces, intelligence adjacent, the specific classification that didn't have a clean title on any public document. She had spent 4 years doing work that required the overlap of her medical training and a set of other capabilities that the forces had identified early and developed carefully. She had been good at it. That was the honest accounting. She had been very good at it, and she had known she was good at it, and that knowledge had cost her. Because competence in that landscape attracted attention. She hadn't always chosen and couldn't always control. 6 years ago, she had been part of an operation that went wrong in a way that operations going wrong rarely went. Not through failure, but through success that produced consequences nobody had planned for. A network had been dismantled. People had been exposed. The exposure had cascaded through several levels of an organization that, it turned out, had deeper roots than the intelligence going in had suggested. One of those roots belonged to a man named Crow, not Damien Crow directly. A funding layer 2 removes from him, connected through a financial infrastructure she had helped map and subsequently helped dismantle. The investigation that followed, the conduct review that appeared in her sealed record, had cleared her of wrongdoing, but had also made plainly clear that the organization she'd helped expose had identified her as the operational thread that had pulled everything loose. She had left the forces. She had built Kaya Mercer. She had come to Toronto because Toronto was large and anonymous, and she had chosen it with the careful logic of someone constructing a perimeter. She had not known that the network she'd dismantled 6 years ago had continued its patient reconstruction under a different name, under Damien Crow's direct management, and that she was the unfinished business at the center of it. "He didn't build an empire to take Toronto," she said. "He built it to find me. The territory, the expansion, the war with your organization, that's all infrastructure. That's all the mechanism for getting to a point where he could surface me, expose the identity I built, and finish what the original network started 6 years ago." Lucien was very still. "He used me to find you," he said, "and he used me to expose you. 2 purposes. 1 operation." She looked at the table. "Drev wasn't placed in your organization to gather intelligence on you. He was placed to watch for me. To watch for anyone who matched the profile, the medical training, the background gap, the specific behavioral signatures that are apparently harder to bury than I believed. She felt something move through her that wasn't quite bitterness and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. The moment I walked into the Meridian Grand, Drev had been looking for me for 2 years. Rook said very quietly, "How did Crow know you'd surface in Toronto?" "He didn't. He had someone in every major Canadian city with the same brief." She looked up. "Patient man?" The room held that information for a moment. Sable was at her laptop, and Kaya could see from the quality of Sable's attention that she was running the new framework against everything she'd accumulated in 6 months of Crow's network, reconfiguring the picture. She watched Sable's face move through 3 small recalibrations in 60 seconds. "The financial layer," Sable said without looking up. "The one I couldn't crack. It's not a finance layer, it's a records layer." She typed fast. "He's been building a file on you, Kaya. Identity documents, the conduct review summary, someone leaked a summary, not the full record, the Mercer background, employment history at St. Aurelius." She stopped typing, looked up. "There's a distribution list attached to the file, 12 recipients." "Who are they?" Lucian said. "I need time to identify them." "We may not have time," Kaya said. She stood up. She felt the plan she'd constructed before the revelation of Drev's code, the plan she'd walked in with, built from the library research and Sable's intercepts and the geography of Crow's network, restructuring itself around the new foundation. The pieces were mostly the same. The logic had shifted. This was no longer about protecting Lucian's organization from a territorial takeover. It never had been. This was about the distribution list attached to a file with her real name on it. 12 recipients, 12 points of exposure, some of which she could guess. Former contacts, intelligence-adjacent individuals, who would know exactly what the file contained and what to do with it. Once that file distributed, Kaya Voss would resurface whether she chose to or not, and the people who had spent 6 years looking for her would have coordinates. "Crow needs to be the only one who knows where that file lives," she said. "If Sable can access the storage architecture, I'm already in it," Sable said. She had the quality, in this moment, of someone running very fast towards something while appearing to sit completely still. "The file is in a distributed storage system. It's not in one place. 3 nodes. I can see 2 of them. The third is behind a secondary authentication layer. Can you get through it?" "Given enough time." "How much time?" Sable looked at her. "More than we have if Crow decides to distribute tonight." Kaya turned to Lucian. "Drev responded to the meeting request with my location code, which means he's trying to communicate something. He wants contact." "Or it's a trap," Rook said. "If it's a trap, we walk into it with eyes open and use it," she said. "If it isn't, Drev gives us the 3rd node." She looked at Lucian. "It was inside Crow's operation for however long they ran him before they put him in yours. He knows the infrastructure." "He betrayed my organization," Lucian said. His voice was level. The levelness was the whole of the control. "I know that." She held his gaze. "And I know what I'm asking." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him work through it. Not the easy version, not the version where you bypass the cost of a thing by framing it usefully. The real version, where the cost was the cost, and you paid it anyway because the alternative was worse. "Set up the meeting," he said. Drev had chosen a location on the eastern waterfront, a section of boardwalk that closed at sundown and was empty at midnight, except for the wind off the lake and the distant lights of the islands. She had to admit it was a good choice. Open sight lines, no structures to stage an ambush in, the kind of space where you could see everything coming from a long way off. She went alone. That was the condition Drev had communicated in the response. 1 person, no weapons visible. She had made no promises about the second condition. Rook had 2 people in vehicles at the access points. Lucienne was in the second vehicle, and she had spent 4 minutes arguing him into staying there, and had won only because she'd pointed out, with specificity, that his presence would collapse whatever opening Drev was trying to create. She stood on the boardwalk at 12:40 a.m. with the lake wind cutting through her jacket and waited. Drev came from the south, walking along the waterfront path, with his hands visible and his pace deliberate. He was wearing less than the weather required, which told her he hadn't planned this far ahead, that the response to Sable's message had been a decision made fast, under pressure, without preparation. That was useful information. He stopped 6 feet from her. They looked at each other. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had the specific quality of someone who had done something they were not going to be able to undo and had arrived at the part where they lived with it. He didn't look like a man who had made a comfortable choice. "You're not who I expected them to send," he said. "Who did you expect?" "Rook." He glanced behind her, confirming what he already knew. "He's here somewhere." "Drev," she kept her voice even. "The code you used. Where did you get it?" He looked at her. There's something in his face shifted. "Crow gave it to me 2 months ago. He said it was a verification signal, something you'd recognize that would tell you he had access to your prior life. He was using it to tell me he had leverage." "Yes." Drev looked at the lake. "I didn't know what it was until I used it just now and understood from your response that it meant something real." He paused. "I didn't know, when I started this, that you were the actual target. I thought it was Lucian." He said Lucian's name with the specific weight of someone who had spent 7 years using it and understood what he'd done to the person behind it. "I thought it was a territory play, that Crow wanted the East End operation and Lucian was the obstacle." "When did you understand differently?" "Tonight, when Crow laid out the plan in that room and you were in the center of it." He turned back to her. "I've done things in my life that I've accounted for, things that have a logic I can follow. What he's planning for you—" He stopped. "There's a reason I used a code I didn't understand. I was looking for a way out of the room I'd walked into." She studied him, read the face, the posture, the specific quality of stillness in a large man who was not by nature still. "The third node," she said, "the storage architecture for the file he's built on me. Sable found 2 of the 3. We need the third." Drev looked at her steadily. "And if I give it to you?" "Then Sable brings the whole system down before he distributes. The file disappears. His leverage disappears." She held his gaze. "And you still have to live with what you did to Lucian's organization. I can't make that go away. I'm not offering to." He absorbed that without flinching. "I know." "The third node," she said again. He told her. She had it memorized before he finished the sentence. She pressed the comm point on her wrist twice, the signal to Sable, and repeated the technical specifications into the air in a voice low enough that only the comm would carry it. They stood on the boardwalk for a moment after that, in the wind and the dark. "Marcus," Drev said. "He'll recover." Drev nodded once. He looked like a man finishing a calculation that had been running for a long time and finding the answer worse than he'd hoped, but not worse than he deserved. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked at the lake. "There's one more thing," he said. "Crow doesn't wait for morning. What he told Lucian tonight, the offer, the timeline, that was performance. He's moving tonight, an hour from now, maybe less." He looked at her. "The foundry. He doesn't leave that building without Lucian's answer, which means he's going to manufacture one." She was already moving. Sable's voice in her ear as she crossed the parking lot to Rook's vehicle. "I'm in the third node. Kaya, this file, it's not 12 recipients. The distribution list has 47 names. It's been growing." She pulled the vehicle door open. Lucien was in the back seat. He read her face and said nothing. "How long to bring it down?" she said into the comm. "The nodes aren't independent, they're mirrored. If I collapse the primary, the mirrors fail. But he has a failsafe. Manual distribution trigger. If he activates it before I finish..." "How long, Sable?" 20 minutes. Maybe 15 if the secondary authentication doesn't flag me." "Drev says he moves in an hour." "Then I have time. Do it now. Don't stop for anything." She looked at Rook. "The foundry." Rook was already driving. In the back seat, Lucian said, "Tell me the rest." She told him while Rook drove through the empty late-night streets. The distribution list, the size of it, what it meant. 47 names. 47 points of exposure, some of them certainly connected to the network she'd dismantled 6 years ago, people who would receive a file identifying Kaya Voss and know exactly what they were looking at and what they were expected to do. Lucian listened to all of it. His hands were on his knees, flat, still. "When this is over," he said, "what happens to Kaya Mercer?" She looked out the window. The city was sliding past. Streets she'd driven to work. A block she recognized from a walk she'd taken in October. the particular geography of a life she'd built with care and specificity. "That depends on how tonight goes," she said. "And if it goes well?" She looked at him. I was watching her with the attention she'd cataloged across 5 days of knowing him. The attention that wasn't calculation, that was something less managed and more direct. "I haven't decided," she said honestly. He nodded. That was all. He didn't push it, didn't offer reassurance, didn't perform optimism. He just received it, which was, she thought, the most useful thing he could have done. The foundry had 4 entrances. Crow's security had 2 covered visibly, the main doors and the vehicle access on the south side. Rook's people had identified the other 2 over the preceding hours, and the quality of coverage on those was lighter, which was consistent with a team that believed the primary threat came from a direction they were watching. They came through the East Service entrance at 1:17 a.m. Kaya first, because she knew the interior from her earlier position. Rook behind her. Lucian behind Rook, and she had argued about this in the vehicle and lost, which she'd known she would lose but had argued anyway because losing arguments on record felt important. The main floor was different from before. The table arrangement had changed, chairs pushed back, 2 of Crow's people visible near the north wall with the positioning of men who were waiting for something to happen rather than making it happen. Briar was near the main entrance, his back to the room, watching the doors. Crow was at the head of the cleared table, on his phone, speaking with the specific brevity of someone issuing final instructions. He looked up when they came through. The room reorganized itself in the 3 seconds of mutual recognition. Crow's people moving, Rook moving, the particular geometry of a space reconfiguring around a confrontation that had been coming for longer than anyone in the room had been aware. Kaya walked directly to the center of the room. She didn't run. Running was for situations where distance was the objective. Distance was not the objective. "Mr. Crow," she said. He looked at her with the expression of someone whose timeline had just been disrupted in a way they hadn't accounted for. Not fear, recalculation. The expression of a thorough man encountering a variable he'd underweighted. "Ms. Voss," he said. The name landed in the room. Lucian's expression didn't move. "The file," she said. "The storage architecture. Sable's been in it for 11 minutes. She held his gaze. "By the time you reach for that manual trigger, there won't be anything left to distribute." Something moved through Crow's face. Fast, controlled. "You're bluffing." "I'm not." Her voice was level. "You know I'm not, because the person who built that identity and built it well enough to survive 2 years of your surveillance is not someone who bluffs in the final position." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Lucian. "This is what you brought to the table," he said to Lucian. The tone had lost its boardroom quality. Something underneath was showing. A woman with a burned cover and a grudge. "She's not carrying a grudge," Lucian said. "That's what you've been miscalculating from the beginning." He moved to stand beside her. Not in front, beside. "You built 6 years of architecture on the assumption that she was running from something. She wasn't running. She was building." Briar moved from the entrance. Rook tracked him, and the tracking was visible, and Briar read it and stopped. Crow set his phone down on the table. A deliberate gesture, the gesture of a man who was deciding something, and who wanted the room to see him deciding it. "The file is gone?" he said to Kaya. Her comm gave her a single click, Sable's confirmation signal. "The file is gone," she said. He looked at his phone on the table. He looked at Briar. He looked at the 2 men near the north wall and read something in their positioning that told him what he needed to know about the calculation. He had numbers in the room. Rook and Lucian and Kaya did not constitute a numerical advantage. But Crow had spent 6 years building an operation on the leverage of information. Without the file, without Drev, whose absence from the room he had now clocked, without the distribution list that was the mechanism of his final position, he was standing in a room with a gun he'd already fired. "Pavel," he said. Pavel, who had been standing against the wall in a position Kaya had tracked since they came through the entrance, reached inside his jacket. She moved before the motion completed. Not toward Pavel, toward the table, the specific corner of it, the angle that put Crow between her and the room and her hand on his phone before anyone had fully processed the direction. She picked up the phone, turned it so the screen faced him. The screen showed an incoming notification from Sable's spoofed system, a message that read, "In the format Crow's own network used, authentication failed. Archive deleted. Backup nodes offline. Pavel doesn't change this, she said. Her voice was not loud. What you had is gone. What you built is still here. But what you were going to use it for no longer exists. She set the phone back down. You're a thorough man. You've demonstrated that. A thorough man understands when the position has closed. The room was very quiet. Pavel's hand was still inside his jacket. Kaya did not look at Pavel. She kept her eyes on Crow, because Crow was the room and everyone in it knew it. Crow looked at her. He looked at her with the specific attention of someone who has seen something clearly for the first time, not because it hadn't been there before, but because the framework he'd been using to look at it had just been removed. Stand down, he said. He said it to Pavel, but he was still looking at her. Pavel's hand came back out of his jacket. Empty. The room let out a breath that nobody had been aware they were holding. What followed was not clean. She had not promised it would be clean. Crow did not go quietly into whatever cooperation Lucian's lawyers subsequently extracted from him over the weeks that followed. Cooperation that was encouraged by Sable's archive of 6 months of network communications, which was a different kind of leverage than a file with a name on it, more durable and more legally actionable. He contested, he maneuvered, he had his own lawyers and his own relationships, and the machine of his organization did not stop simply because its primary engine had been stalled. But the architecture that had taken 6 years to build had been constructed on a foundation of information leverage, and without that foundation, the architecture was weight without support. It came down in stages, over weeks, and each stage was unglamorous and procedural and exhausting in the specific way that aftermath was always exhausting. Not the sharp exhaustion of crisis, but the long, grinding kind that sat in your bones. 3 days after the foundry, Kaya went back to work. She walked into St. Aurelius General at 5:55 a.m., 7 minutes before her shift, and went through the locker room and clipped her badge correctly, and walked into the trauma bay. And Petra looked up from the desk and looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who had spent 4 days constructing a set of questions. Coffee, Kaya said. I already made it, Petra said. They sat in the break room and Kaya told her. Not everything. She was honest about that caveat and Petra accepted it. But enough. Enough that Petra understood the shape of what had happened and what Kaya's life was and what the past 5 days had contained. She told it without editorializing and without asking for any particular response. Petra listened to all of it with the quality of attention that had always been her particular gift. The listening that didn't require you to explain yourself and didn't offer comfort before you were finished. When Kaya was done, Petra said, the man outside the ER, gone. And the woman in my parking structure. There was no woman in your parking structure. That was leverage that was never deployed. Kaya looked at her coffee. But your car was watched for 2 nights, and I'm sorry for that. Petra was quiet for a moment. This Lucian Vale. Yes. He's what exactly? Kaya looked at her. I don't have a clean answer to that. Is he safe to be around? She thought about that with the honesty she owed the question. Safer than he was 2 weeks ago. Petra absorbed this. She picked up her coffee, drank from it, set it down. You're staying. It wasn't a question. It was Petra reading her the way Petra had always read her. Not from what she said, but from the way she was sitting, the way her face had settled, the particular quality of someone who had gone somewhere difficult and come back to a place they'd decided to remain. I'm staying, Kaya said. Petra nodded once. Good. She stood up. Bay 3 has a fractured radius waiting. They went back to work. Marcus was discharged from the private facility on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the shooting, walking under his own power with a slight forward lean to his right side that the thoracic surgeon said would resolve over the following month. Kaya went to the discharge appointment because she was his primary care coordinator on record and because she wanted to see for herself. He looked at her in the discharge room with the specific expression she remembered from the trauma bay, the one where the fear had moved over and made room for something else. You're the one who told them I needed follow-up with a specialist, he said. Yes. Lucian said he arranged it. He did. I specified what to arrange. Marcus looked at her for a moment. He had the quality of a man who said fewer things than he thought, which she respected. Thank you, he said. Simple. Specific. Take care of the breathing exercises, she said. Twice a day. The lung needs the work. I know. I'll check in 2 weeks. He nodded. Then he said quietly, He's different. She looked at him. Lucien. Marcus adjusted his jacket over the discharged dressing. Since the hotel, since you. He wasn't looking at her anymore, looking at the wall, giving her the space to take that or leave it. Different isn't the wrong word, more like, he paused, like someone who remembered they were a person. She didn't respond to that. She wrote his follow-up instructions on the discharge sheet and gave it to him, and they walked out into the November cold together, and she put him in the car Lucien had sent and watched it pull away. She stood on the curb for a moment. The cold was different from the night of the storm, drier, the particular quality of Toronto in late autumn, when the sleet had given way to something cleaner, and the city settled into its winter coat and kept moving. Her phone was in her pocket. She didn't take it out. She walked back to her car and drove to Ossington. The conversation happened in her apartment on a Sunday afternoon in the third week of November, with weak sunlight coming through the windows and the sound of the street below, doing its ordinary business, and 2 cups of coffee going cold on the kitchen table because neither of them had thought to drink them. Lucien sat across from her with his jacket on the chair beside him and his sleeves pushed up and the butterfly tape long gone from the cut above his ear, only a thin pale line left. She looked at that line sometimes and thought about the hotel lobby and the revolving door and the 9 steps she'd taken before a collision changed the direction of everything. The East End operation, she said. Folded, he said. Not to Crow. I gave 3 of the operations to the people running them. Direct ownership, no intermediary. He looked at his hands. It's smaller now, more manageable. A pause. More honest about what it is. And Drev? He's gone. Not violently. He said the last part before she could ask. He left the city. I don't know where he went, and I haven't looked. His jaw moved once. I spent 2 weeks being angry about it, and then I spent 1 week understanding that the anger was partly at myself, and then I stopped performing the anger. She looked at him. And now? Now I'm sitting in your kitchen on a Sunday. She picked up her coffee, drank some of it cold, set it down. My name is Kaya Voss, she said. I've decided I'm not going to stop being Kaya Mercer. The name is mine now. I built it. She held his gaze. But I'm not going to pretend the other name doesn't exist. I know both your names, he said. I know you do. She looked at the table. There are things from the prior version of my life that aren't resolved. The network I helped dismantle. Crow was one piece of it. There are others. People who may still be looking, though the file is gone and Crow's cooperation has dried up several significant information channels. She paused. I'm not telling you this to ask you for anything. I'm telling you because you're honest about the terrain, he said. Yes. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of quiet she'd catalogued across 5 days of crisis and several weeks of aftermath, the quiet of a man who processed things without performing the processing. Elise would have been 30 this year, he said. He said it simply, without preamble, in the way he'd said her name in the consultation room. I've been rebuilding the organization under rules that would have saved her. It's not... I know it doesn't change what happened. He looked at the window. But it's something to do with it. She knew what he meant by that. The specific knowledge of doing something with grief that couldn't be resolved, only carried. The emergency protocols I designed, she said, for your people. I want to keep them. I know. I want to maintain them. She looked at him directly. Which is a different arrangement than what we've been doing. What have we been doing? Surviving a situation. She kept her eyes on his. I'm saying I'm interested in something that isn't crisis-generated. He held her gaze. The thing behind his eyes that she'd been reading since the parking structure, the thing that was less like the managed surface and more like the person underneath it, was fully visible in this light, in this quiet room, without the architecture of emergency to contain it. So am I, he said. The simplicity of it was the whole of it. No pressure, no performance, no promise about what it would look like or how it would hold. Just 2 people, in a kitchen, on a Sunday, saying the true thing. She picked up her coffee again. He picked up his. They were both cold and neither of them mentioned it. Outside on Ossington, the city was doing its ordinary business. Someone's delivery arriving, a dog barking twice and stopping, the distant sound of a streetcar on Dundas making its reliable east-west run. The particular sound of a city that didn't know or care about any individual life within it, which was not a cold fact but a freeing one, if you let it be. Mrs. Calloway knocked at the door at 3 p.m. with a container of soup she said she'd made too much of, which was not true but was kind, and Kaya took it and thanked her and introduced Lucian, who shook Mrs. Calloway's hand with the careful courtesy of someone who understood that this woman mattered, and that mattering was the relevant fact. Mrs. Calloway looked at him with the assessment of a woman in her 70s who had been reading people for longer than either of them had been alive, and she said, "You have good hands," which was not the observation Kaya had expected, and then she went back downstairs and the door closed. Lucien looked at Kaya. "Good hands?" he said. "High praise," Kaya said. "She told the last man I introduced her to that he had a weak chin." "Did he?" "Genuinely, yes." Something crossed his face that was the least managed expression she'd seen on him. Not the fractional shift, not the controlled surface. Something that was simply and plainly a person finding a moment unexpectedly light. It lasted about 3 seconds, and then it settled back into something calmer but didn't disappear entirely. She thought that was probably how it would be. Not the dramatic replacement of oneself with another, not the clean ending where everything resolved into a new shape and stayed there. Just the gradual accumulation of moments that were not crisis, that were not survival, that were the slow and unspectacular work of two people learning the ordinary version of each other after an extraordinary beginning. She had stopped running 3 years ago when she came to Toronto. She had believed, at the time, that stopping was the whole of what she needed to do. She understood now that stopping was just the precondition. The thing that came after stopping was harder and less dramatic and more worth doing. She put the soup on the stove. The city went on outside. The afternoon light came through the windows at the angle it always came at this time of year. Long and thin and winter yellow. The kind of light that didn't stay long but made the room look like something while it was there. Lucian sat at her kitchen table with his sleeves pushed up and his coffee going cold, and the look of a man who had nowhere he needed to be and had decided that was enough. Kaya stood at the stove and listened to the soup begin its quiet work and felt, for the first time in longer than she could cleanly measure, the particular quality of a life that had room in it, not for perfection, not for safety in any absolute sense, but for the kind of ordinary Tuesday things that people who were only surviving never quite reached. The storm had passed. What it left behind was not what she'd had before, and not what she'd planned, and not what anyone reasonable would have chosen as a path. It was hers. That was enough. That was, she had come to understand, the whole of what enough ever looked like.